Laura had always believed her marriage to Daniel was built on solid ground. 18 years together, a shared mortgage, a teenage daughter they both adored. It looked sturdy enough from the outside. Friends admired them, often remarking on how Daniel still opened doors for her, how he showed up for school recitals. Yet Laura, at 42, had lived long enough to know appearances could be carefully managed, and lately Daniel had been managing them a little too well. It started small, a late meeting here, an unexpected conference call there. Laura was no stranger to his demanding job, but the patterns shifted. He no longer lingered at the dinner table. His phone lived in his palm, buzzing with texts he never explained. And the warmth that once flickered in his eyes when she spoke, it dimmed, replaced by a distracted nod, a muttered, uh-huh. One Thursday night, as Laura set two plates of reheated pasta on the kitchen island, she asked the question that had been pressing at her ribs. Daniel, you're working late again? He looked up from his phone, offering a faint smile. Yeah, deadlines. Don't wait up. The exchange ended as quickly as it began, but something in his tone hung in the air. He wasn't tense, just rehearsed. Laura didn't push further. Instead, she let silence stretch between them, filling the room thicker than steam from the pasta. Later, after Emily had gone upstairs to finish homework, Laura gathered the dishes and realized Daniel hadn't even touched his food. His car keys were already gone. The doubt began to coil around her, winding tighter each day. When her closest friends suggested she was imagining things, Laura laughed it off in public but replayed every detail in private. Daniel's faint cologne lingering long past midnight, his shirt smelling faintly of laundry detergent they didn't use. The way he angled his phone screen away whenever she passed by. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years, and her instincts were screaming. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, while Daniel claimed he was off to catch up on reports, Laura sat at her laptop scrolling through forums she'd never thought she'd visit. Spouses sharing digital detective tips, apps hidden in plain sight. She lingered on one in particular, GPS tracking through the car. Her stomach churned. It felt invasive, wrong even. But the gnawing ache of not knowing had already chewed through her sleep and peace of mind. She justified it in whispers to herself. It's just for safety. If he's telling the truth, I'll feel foolish, but relieved. If not, she couldn't finish the thought. That evening, while Daniel showered, she slipped into the garage, heart pounding against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Her hands shook as she synced the small device to their shared car, pairing it with her phone. A single green light blinked back at her, quiet, complicit. For days, she checked the tracker half-heartedly, convincing herself she was being paranoid. The car went to his office, to the grocery store, to the gym. All normal. But then came Tuesday night. Daniel had left after dinner, claiming he needed to finalize a proposal. Laura curled on the sofa with Emily, watching a movie, but her mind wasn't in the room. She opened the tracker app casually, just to glance. The dot pulsed on the screen, steady, insistent. Not at the office, not at the gym. It sat motionless at an address she didn't recognize, just 7 miles from their own home. Her throat tightened. She zoomed in, checking again, refreshing, convincing herself it must be an error. But the dot remained. He was there. For hours. When he returned past midnight, Laura didn't confront him. Instead, she watched him slip out of his shoes, tuck his phone under the pillow, and fall asleep as if nothing was amiss. She lay awake beside him, the sound of his breathing foreign, like sharing a bed with a stranger. The following days brought the same routine. Daniel claimed late work, and the tracker betrayed him every time, the dot flashing at that same anonymous address until nearly midnight. Each time, Laura's chest constricted tighter. She rehearsed questions in her head, but the words felt too fragile to survive outside of her thoughts. By the end of the week, Laura sat at the kitchen table long after Emily had gone to bed, her phone screen glowing in the dim light. The dot on the tracker pulsed again at that address. Her fingers drummed against the wood. She whispered aloud, voice breaking in the empty room. "Oh God, what are you doing there, Daniel?" Her hands clenched into fists, nails pressing half-moons into her palms. She knew she couldn't keep circling around suspicions forever. Something was happening just miles away, and the truth was waiting there for her, merciless and uninvited. Laura couldn't shake the glow of that dot on her screen. It stayed with her at work, followed her into the grocery store aisles, shadowed her even as she tried to laugh at Emily's jokes. A rhythm had formed. Daniel disappeared after dinner, and the tracker revealed the same address. Each night, her fear sharpened. By Friday, she could no longer bear the silence of not knowing. She tucked her phone into her coat pocket, waited until Daniel kissed Emily goodnight, and watched him drive off with the same casual excuse. She lingered a few minutes, heart hammering, then slid behind the wheel of her own car. The streets looked darker than usual. Headlights painted quick streaks across asphalt as Laura followed at a distance, keeping two cars between them whenever possible. She told herself she was being ridiculous, but her knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. "Don't lose him," she whispered into the empty car. "Don't you dare lose him." Daniel's sedan glided through familiar roads, then veered off into neighborhoods she rarely visited. Suburban houses stretched on, quiet and still, porch lights glowing faintly. Laura slowed, pulse pounding in her ears. Finally, he pulled into a modest two-story house with a neat garden. Laura killed her engine a block away and sank lower into her seat, gripping the wheel like a lifeline. Then she saw it. The front door swung open, and a woman appeared. Mid-30s maybe, dark hair tied back in a loose bun, wearing a casual sweater. She smiled with easy warmth, as though she had been waiting. Moments later, two children burst out, racing toward Daniel. A boy of about 10 and a younger girl no older than 7. They threw themselves into his arms, squealing. Laura's chest caved in. Her breath hitched as though someone had struck her with invisible hands. She couldn't look away, yet the sight burned. "Oh my God," she whispered, voice trembling. "Another family." She watched Daniel laugh, lifting the children effortlessly, pressing kisses on their cheeks as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The woman joined them, resting a hand on Daniel's shoulder. He leaned into her touch with a familiarity Laura hadn't felt in years. Laura's vision blurred. She blinked hard, furious at the tears that betrayed her. She had expected maybe a fling, a bar or hotel rendezvous. But this was a life, a second life. Time slipped by unnoticed as Laura sat frozen. Her thoughts spiraled, looping between disbelief and clarity. How long had this been going on? Did Emily know something she didn't? Was she the fool living in the shadow of another household? She forced her trembling hands to pull out her phone. She zoomed in with the camera, snapping a photo of Daniel holding the children, another of him standing close to the woman. Proof. Ugly, undeniable proof. Her stomach lurched, and she opened the window to gulp the cool night air. She thought of Emily at home, waiting for her father to return, innocent in her trust. A bitter taste filled Laura's mouth. When Daniel finally disappeared inside the house with the others, lights flickering on in the windows, Laura stayed behind, staring at the glowing squares until the cold seeped into her bones. She could have confronted him right then, stormed up the walkway and demanded answers. But something anchored her to the driver's seat. Fear, shock, maybe the cruel need to see just how deep the lie ran. At home, she slipped inside quietly, the way Daniel often did. Emily's bedroom door was shut, a faint hum of music seeping out. Laura stood in the hallway for a long moment, hand resting on the frame, before retreating to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her coat, phone heavy in her hand. The photos glared back at her, harsh proof of the life Daniel had been living just miles away. She wanted to smash the phone against the wall, erase the truth, but she couldn't. When the clock pushed past midnight, the familiar sound of Daniel's key turning in the lock echoed through the house. He patted inside, humming softly, as though nothing in the world were amiss. Laura slipped beneath the covers, feigning sleep, her heart drumming in her chest. She listened to him settle in beside her, the bed dipping under his weight. His breathing evened out quickly. She turned her back to him, eyes open wide in the dark. A stranger shared her pillow now, and the house no longer felt like home. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, but Laura felt none of its warmth. She moved through the kitchen like a ghost, pouring cereal for Emily, nodding at her daughter's chatter without catching a word. Across the counter, Daniel buttered his toast, scrolling through his phone as if last night's double life weren't stitched into his every breath. Laura studied him with quiet precision, the slope of his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when he laughed at something on his screen. He looked like the man she had married, yet her mind replayed the sight of him lifting those children, his arms around another woman. She wanted to scream. Instead, she swallowed hard and slid a glass of juice across the counter to Emily. "Mom, are you okay? You're not yourself," Emily asked, narrowing her teenage eyes. Laura forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired." Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Over the next few days, Laura lived two lives of her own. By day, she was the dutiful wife and mother, keeping the household moving. By night, she became a watcher, a chronicler of Daniel's betrayal. Each time he left, she followed the blinking dot on her tracker, documenting his visits to that same modest house. She saw patterns. He never stayed the night. He left before dawn, slipping back into their bed with the smell of someone else's detergent on his clothes. He carried groceries into the other house, raked leaves with the children, leaned in for kisses he no longer gave her. Laura began snapping photos through her windshield, grainy, distant, but undeniable. Daniel on the porch with Rachel, Daniel pushing a little girl on a swing, Daniel's hand resting casually on Rachel's waist. Her phone became a vault of evidence, each picture a knife she pressed into her own chest. At home, the silence between Laura and Daniel stretched wider. They still exchanged words but never truths. One evening, while Emily was upstairs, Laura set down her fork mid-dinner and studied Daniel across the table. "Daniel, do you ever feel like we're not really here anymore?" He looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "Like we're just acting out the motions." He frowned, reaching for his glass of water. "Laura, you're overthinking. Work's been crazy, that's all. Things will settle." But the way he avoided her eyes confirmed what she already knew. He was rehearsed just as he had been before. So Laura started writing down details in a notebook she kept hidden in her nightstand. Times, dates, addresses. At first it felt obsessive, but soon it became her only tether to reality. She needed proof, not only for herself, but for Emily, for anyone who might ever question her sanity. Still, a part of her clung to doubt. She imagined confronting him and hearing some absurd explanation, that Rachel was a client, the children relatives, the affection misread. But the photographs erased that fantasy. They told the story plain. Daniel was living a second life, and she was merely the shadow of his first. Her body began to betray her. She tossed through sleepless nights, her mind buzzing. Food turned to ash on her tongue. Even at work, colleagues noticed her frayed edges. One afternoon, her friend Marissa stopped her in the break room. "You look exhausted. Everything okay at home?" Laura hesitated, the weight of her secret pressing on her ribs. She forced a laugh. "Yeah, just a rough week." But she saw the doubt in Marissa's eyes, and for a moment Laura longed to spill everything, to finally share the burden. Yet she kept it locked inside. She wasn't ready for the world to know. The pressure mounted until Laura nearly broke. One night after Daniel slipped out with his usual excuse, she sat at the kitchen table, her phone glowing with the tracker. The dot rested at the house. Her hand shook as she dialed his number. "Hello?" Daniel's voice came warm, practiced. "Where are you?" she asked, her tone steady but sharp. "Still at the office." "Why?" Laura stared at the blinking dot. The lie was so smooth it chilled her. "I just wanted to know if you were coming home soon." "Don't wait up," he said, then hung up. Her chest tightened until she thought it might split open. The rage boiled beneath her skin, but she forced herself to stay quiet. Tonight wasn't the night. She needed him cornered, unable to twist away. Later, Emily padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Mom, why are you still up?" Laura quickly closed the notebook and forced another tired smile. "Just couldn't sleep." Emily tilted her head. "Dad's not home again." Laura swallowed hard. "He's working late." It was a lie that scorched her throat. Emily nodded slowly but didn't look convinced. She leaned against her mother's shoulder for a moment, then shuffled back upstairs. Laura sat alone, the silence pressing in. She knew the time for quiet was ending. Proof wasn't enough anymore. She needed the truth spoken aloud, dragged into the light. Her fingers brushed over the hidden notebook, then over the photos stored in her phone. She inhaled deeply. Soon, she whispered into the empty room. You won't lie your way out of this, Daniel. Not anymore. Laura didn't plan it, not exactly. Confrontations rarely bloom from neat outlines. They explode when silence grows too heavy to bear. That Saturday evening, the air in the house felt charged, brittle as glass. Emily was out with friends, leaving only Laura and Daniel at the dinner table. Daniel picked at his food absent-mindedly, scrolling on his phone between bites. The glow lit up his features, softening them into someone unbothered, someone who still had control. Laura sat across from him, her notebook hidden away upstairs, her phone heavy in her pocket. Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. She set her fork down with deliberate finality. Daniel. He glanced up, eyebrows raised. Yeah? Her hands trembled, but her voice came steady. How long have you been lying to me? His face stilled, a flicker of confusion, or perhaps calculation, crossing his eyes. What are you talking about? Laura pulled her phone from her pocket and set it on the table. The screen glowed with the GPS history, a neat red line tracing his nightly route to Rachel's house. She slid it across to him. I know where you go. I know who you're with. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't reach for the phone, just stared at it like it might detonate. Laura pressed harder, her voice breaking now with fury. How long, Daniel? How long have you been living this other life? He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Laura, it's not what you think. Her laugh cracked like glass. Not what I think? I've seen you. With her. With those children. Tell me what I saw, Daniel. Tell me why you kiss her at the door like you haven't kissed me in years. Silence hung heavy, suffocating. Then his shoulders sagged, and the mask slipped. Almost 10 years, he said quietly. Laura blinked, stunned by the bluntness. 10 years? 10 years, and you looked me in the eye every day? Slept in my bed, raised our daughter, and went right back to them? Daniel's voice cracked, but it wasn't remorse. It was desperation. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You didn't mean? Her voice rose, sharp as a blade. You chose it. Every night you drove there, every time you touched her, every time you came home and lied to me, you chose it. He finally reached for the phone, staring at the damning trail of data. Rachel doesn't know about you. She thinks I'm divorced. Laura recoiled as though he had struck her. You've lied to her, too. You've made her a fool just like me. Daniel's eyes pleaded, but his words only deepened the wound. I love you both. I love all of you. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Laura's voice dropped to a whisper, jagged with disbelief. You call that love? Splitting yourself in half? Handing out scraps to two families who deserved a whole man? His hands spread helplessly on the table. If you tell her, if you ruin this, you'll destroy both families. Laura slammed her palms down, the sound echoing through the room. I'll destroy them. You destroyed them the moment you decided you could be two men at once. Her chest heaved, fury colliding with grief. She stared at the man she had shared nearly 2 decades with and saw nothing familiar left. The silence stretched until Laura couldn't bear it. She stood, shoving her chair back. Daniel rose too, reaching for her arm, but she jerked away. Don't touch me. Laura, please, I never stopped loving you. Her laugh was hollow, bitter. You stopped being my husband the moment you kissed her. Don't you dare use that word with me. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let him see her crumble. She walked out of the kitchen, her steps slow, deliberate. Behind her, Daniel's voice trembled. Please don't leave like this. We can fix it. She paused in the doorway, turning back with eyes burning. There's no fixing a life built on lies. Then she left him standing alone in the kitchen, the glow of the GPS screen still glaring from the table, marking every path he had taken away from her. When Laura reached the bedroom, she shut the door and pressed her back against it, her breath ragged. The sound of Daniel pacing below drifted up faintly, but she tuned it out. For the first time, the house no longer felt like theirs. She sank onto the bed, gripping her notebook tight against her chest. The truth was finally spoken, dragged into the light, but the weight of it pressed down harder than she imagined. She had won nothing, only clarity, and clarity hurt like hell. The morning after the confrontation, Laura awoke with the weight of her chest pressing against the mattress like stone. Sunlight cut across the bedroom, harsh and unforgiving. Daniel's side of the bed was empty, the sheets smoothed as if he had never been there at all. For a moment, she let herself imagine it, that he was gone, erased, a ghost who had never touched her life. But the smell of his cologne lingered faintly on the pillow, and the ache in her ribs reminded her that ghosts couldn't wound this deep. Downstairs, the kitchen hummed with the sound of the coffee maker. Daniel moved about quietly as though rehearsing normalcy. When she finally entered, he looked up with eyes rimmed in red. "Morning," he said, voice rough. Laura poured herself coffee without answering. The silence was deliberate, punishing. He shifted in his chair, restless. "Laura, I know you're furious, and you have every right to be. But please, please don't make any decisions yet. Let's just talk." Her laugh was sharp. "Talk? You spent 10 years giving your words to her. Now you want to use them on me?" Daniel flinched but pressed on. "We can figure this out. We have Emily. We have a life here. Don't throw everything away." She set her cup down, leaning close enough for him to feel the edge in her voice. "I didn't throw anything away. You did. All I'm doing is looking at the ashes." That afternoon, Laura sat in her car outside a law office downtown. The building looked unremarkable, just glass and concrete, but to her it was a door she wasn't sure she had the strength to walk through. She clenched the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened, then finally pushed herself inside. The lawyer, a middle-aged woman named Harris, listened quietly as Laura laid out her story. At first, the words tumbled awkwardly, but once the dam cracked, they poured out. GPS logs, photographs, lies layered on lies. Harris took notes, face unreadable. When Laura finally stopped, wrung out, Harris leaned forward. "You have grounds, solid grounds. The deception, the second household, all of it. But you need to decide what you want. Divorce, custody arrangements, financial division. It's not just about exposing him. It's about building what comes next." Laura nodded, her throat tight. "I don't know yet. I need options." "Then that's where we'll start," Harris said gently. Back at home, Laura kept her new resolve hidden. She tucked the lawyer's card into her notebook, slipped both back into the nightstand. She wasn't ready for Emily to know, not yet. Her daughter deserved her innocence a little longer. But Emily noticed the cracks anyway. One night, as they folded laundry together, Emily looked at her with sharp teenage perception. "Mom, you and Dad, you're not okay, are you?" Laura's hands stilled on a shirt. She wanted to lie, but the weight of too many lies already filled the house. Instead, she brushed Emily's hair from her face. "We're going through something hard, but you're not to blame for any of it. Do you understand?" Emily's eyes welled. "Is he leaving?" Laura's throat burned, but she shook her head. "No, he's not leaving, but things are changing." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for now. Daniel, meanwhile, grew desperate. He hovered more, his phone mysteriously tucked away now, his eyes following Laura, as if afraid she might vanish. He tried small gestures, offering to cook dinner, suggesting a movie night, even bringing flowers that withered quickly in their vase. One evening, he cornered her in the living room, his tone urgent. If you tell Rachel, you'll tear apart those kids' lives. They didn't ask for any of this." Laura stared at him, her anger sparking again. "And Emily asked for it? Our daughter asked to live in a house built on secrets?" He winced but pressed on. "We can fix this. I can be here fully if you let me. Please, just don't ruin everything." Her voice turned to steel. "You don't get to decide what's ruined. You set the fire. I'm just standing in the smoke." Daniel's expression crumbled, but Laura no longer softened at the sight. His grief wasn't hers to carry. Late that night, after the house grew still, Laura sat at her desk with her notebook open. She wrote out a list, not of his betrayals, but of her steps forward. Lawyer, savings account, telling Emily, confronting Rachel. Each word steadied her hand. For the first time in weeks, she felt control tip slightly back toward her side. Daniel had split himself in two, but Laura would not. She would be whole, even if it meant tearing down the life she once thought unshakable. She closed the notebook and whispered into the silence, a promise to herself more than anyone else. I won't let you decide my future. Not anymore. Laura had rehearsed the conversation in her head 100 different ways, but when the moment finally came, the words still felt jagged in her throat. Emily was sprawled on her bed, scrolling through her phone, the faint sound of music drifting from her earbuds. Can we talk? Laura asked softly, leaning against the doorframe. Emily pulled one bud free, sensing the seriousness in her mother's tone. Sure. What's up? Laura crossed the room and sat at the edge of the bed. For a moment, she studied her daughter's face, the same sharp cheekbones as Daniel, the same warm eyes, and she thought of how betrayal often passed silently through bloodlines. There's something you need to know about your father, Laura began, voice trembling. Emily straightened, her phone slipping from her hand. What do you mean? Is he sick? Is something wrong? Laura swallowed hard. He's been keeping another family. A woman, 2 children, not far from here. The words landed like stones. Emily blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing without sound before the disbelief broke into a raw edge. No, no, that's not true. Laura reached for her hand, but Emily pulled away, tears streaking her face. It can't be. Dad wouldn't. He did. Laura cut in gently, her voice breaking. I've seen them. I have proof. He's been lying to both of us. Emily shoved back against the headboard, shaking her head violently. So all those late nights, all those excuses, he wasn't working? No, Laura whispered. He wasn't. The silence that followed was heavier than anything Laura had ever endured. Emily curled into herself, sobbing quietly, while Laura sat helplessly beside her. There were no words to soften the shattering of a child's trust. 2 days later, Laura dialed Rachel's number. She had found it tucked away in the records she'd pieced together from GPS logs and careful observation. Her hands shook as she waited, the phone pressed to her ear. Hello? A warm voice answered. Laura's breath caught, but she forced herself forward. Rachel, my name is Laura. I think we need to talk. It's about Daniel. A pause. Daniel? Did something happen? Laura closed her eyes. Yes. He's been lying to both of us. Confusion edged into Rachel's tone. Both of us? I don't understand. He's my husband, Laura said, each word heavy with finality. We've been married 18 years. You're not the only one he's been building a life with. The silence on the other end stretched unbearably, then shattered with a sharp intake of breath. You're lying. I wish I were, Laura whispered, but I have a daughter with him. We live just a few miles away, and he's been with you while coming home to me. Rachel's voice trembled, fury laced with heartbreak. He told me he was divorced, that you were gone. No, I was very much here. He's been lying to us both. Later that evening, Rachel demanded to see Laura face to face. They met at a small cafe, tension thick enough to choke the air. Rachel arrived first, her expression a storm. Anger, disbelief, grief tangled together. When Laura sat down, Rachel's voice cut through the silence. You mean to tell me I've been the mistress all this time, without even knowing it? Laura held her gaze steadily. You were as much a victim as I was. He built his lies carefully. He counted on us never crossing paths. Rachel's hands trembled around her coffee cup. The children adore him. They think he's theirs. He tucks them in at night, helps with homework. How do I explain this? Laura's eyes softened despite her own pain. The same way I had to tell my daughter, with the truth, no matter how much it breaks them. Rachel looked away, tears slipping down her cheeks. I thought he was my future, Laura exhaled shakily. So did I. For a long moment, the two women sat in silence, bound not by rivalry, but by shared devastation. When Daniel returned home that night, Laura was waiting in the living room, arms crossed. He froze at the sight of her calm, steady gaze. You told her, he said flatly. Yes, Laura replied. She knows. Emily knows. Everyone knows now. His face drained of color, panic flickering across his features. Why would you do that? You've ruined everything. Laura rose slowly, her voice unyielding. No, Daniel. You ruined everything. I just stopped helping you hide it. His shoulders slumped, the fight bleeding out of him. For the first time he looked small, cornered, both families slipping from his grasp, the web of lies collapsing, and Laura, standing firm in the wreckage, realized she was no longer afraid of the truth. The house felt different now, emptier, but lighter. Daniel had packed a bag 2 days after the truth spilled into the open, slamming drawers and muttering curses under his breath. He hadn't said goodbye to Emily, just mumbled something about needing space. Laura hadn't stopped him. In the quiet that followed, she discovered that absence could be a strange gift. The air no longer crackled with secrets. The silence was no longer heavy. It was healing. On Sunday morning, Laura and Emily sat at the kitchen table, pancakes piled between them. Emily poked at her plate, still raw, from the truth but less fragile than the night she first learned it. Do you think he'll come back? Emily asked, her voice careful, almost detached. Laura considered the question, then shook her head slowly. If he does, it won't be the same, and it doesn't have to be. We'll be okay without him. Emily searched her mother's face, as if looking for proof. When she found only quiet steadiness, she let out a shaky breath. I'm glad you told me. I don't hate him, but I hate what he did to us. Laura reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. That's enough. We don't have to carry his choices. We just carry each other. For the first time in weeks, Emily smiled. A small, fragile thing, but real. Laura found herself texting Rachel on occasion, not out of friendship, but solidarity. They exchanged brief updates, sometimes venting, sometimes just sharing silence through the screen. Both women had been blindsided, both rebuilding their lives from the rubble of Daniel's deception. One evening, Rachel wrote, "The kids asked where he is. I told them the truth, as gently as I could. They cried, but at least it's real now. Thank you for not letting me live in his lie anymore." Laura stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "None of this is your fault. He fooled us both. But we'll make it through." When Rachel responded with nothing but a single heart emoji, Laura realized they were bound not by rivalry, but by survival. Daniel, on the other hand, began to wither. He sent texts that grew more frantic each day. "We can fix this. Don't take Emily away from me. I never meant to hurt anyone." Laura rarely replied, and when she did, her words were clipped and cold. "You've already hurt us. Fixing it isn't an option anymore." When he tried showing up at the house one evening, Laura met him at the door. He looked haggard, his once polished exterior worn down. "Laura, please. I've lost everything. Don't shut me out." She stood firm, her voice calm. "You didn't lose everything, Daniel. You gave it away, and now you'll live with that choice." When he reached for the doorknob, she shut it gently but firmly in his face. The lock clicked, final and steady. Weeks passed, and life began to stitch itself into something new. Laura started therapy, a place to untangle the knots of betrayal that still tugged at her chest. Emily joined her sometimes, their sessions weaving mother and daughter closer together. The house grew quieter, but it wasn't silence filled with dread anymore. It was peace. Laura began cooking again, filling the kitchen with smells that didn't remind her of him. She and Emily started walking together in the evenings, talking about school, about college dreams, about anything but Daniel. One night, as they walked past the park, Emily slipped her arm through her mother's. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" she asked. Laura looked at her daughter, taller now, stronger somehow. She smiled softly. "We already are." Laura never drove back to that other house again. She deleted the GPS tracker app one evening, watching the icon vanish from her screen with a strange sense of freedom. The blinking dot that once haunted her was gone, replaced by a future she was determined to shape on her own terms. On the kitchen counter, the vase that once held Daniel's hollow apologies, flowers that died too quickly, now bloomed with fresh tulips she had bought herself. They stood bright and defiant, a reminder that life could grow from ruins. Months later, Laura sat on the porch, sipping coffee as Emily studied at the table inside. The air was warm, the kind that promised spring. For the first time in a long time, she felt steady in her skin. Daniel was out there somewhere, drifting between broken homes, but he no longer held her thoughts hostage. Rachel was rebuilding with her children, stronger in the truth. And Laura, she was no longer just surviving. She was living. She whispered to herself, not in bitterness, but in quiet triumph. We'll be okay, not because he left us, but because we found ourselves. And as the sunlight touched her face, she believed it.